Hello, everybody. Sorry, I was muted. Welcome to the League of Women Voters webinar on the future of redistricting in San Luis Obispo County and Senate Bill 977. I'm Leslie Brown. I'm the chair of the Government Policy Committee for the League of Women Voters in San Luis Obispo County. I'll be your moderator today for this presentation about the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission for San Luis Obispo County. The CRC method proposed for our county in Senate Bill 977, which is a bill sponsored by Senator John Laird in response to a decision by our Board of Supervisors to seek an independent commission, will be discussed in this webinar. Today, you'll hear from our expert panel about the process codified in the bill, and it will guide redistricting in the future, beginning after the 2030 census. We as a league support the idea of independent citizens redistricting commissions as a way to ensure fairness of our elections. The purpose of this webinar is to inform you about the process and to help you form your questions and comments about it. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping things that I'd like to go through. We are scheduled for 1 hour. We will try to stay to that. However, if we get a lot of questions, we may be able to go a little bit longer. We'll take questions through the Q&A function. The chat is not working. You can submit a question at any time while the presenters are giving their presentation. And if you would like to direct your question to a specific presenter, please specify that. We'll answer all your questions in the Q&A session following the presentations. We'll get to as many questions as we can, time permitting. If we get a lot and we run out of time, then I apologize for not getting your responses to you. This webinar will be recorded and you'll be able to access it online on our website and via our YouTube channel in 2 to 3 days. And finally, I wanted to mention that the League's website and contact information will be shown in a slide at the very end of the webinar in case you're looking for that. Okay, let's get underway. Our first presenter will be Supervisor Bruce Gibson. He is the supervisor for District 2 and will be giving background and key provisions of Senate Bill 977, including the commissioner requirements and the selection process. So turning it over to you, Bruce.
Thank you so much, Leslie. It's a pleasure to be with you. Let me get teed up for screen sharing here, which of course it doesn't want to do now. Here we go. Let's do that. Oh, so share screen 2. And let me confirm that what you're seeing is a slide about Senate Bill 977.
Good.
And excellent. So the Board of Supervisors of County of San Luis Obispo last year took action to ask our state senator, Senator John Laird, to put forward legislation that would create a redistricting commission for the County of San Luis Obispo. And so he did. Senate Bill 977 has passed the state Senate and is now over in the second house, as we call it, in the Assembly, undergoing Senate Assembly committee hearings. It last heard in the Assembly Elections Committee last Wednesday. So I thought what I'd do is just run real quickly through some things that may be quite familiar to you and start with the question of what is a Citizens Redistricting Commission. It is a body independent of elected officials, created to draw in our case, the election districts for the five supervisorial districts. As an independent body, it's sometimes also referred to as an independent redistricting commission or an IRC, and that's what that you may hear me slip into that terminology myself. The commission is made up of voters, and as I indicated, created to draw the district maps, and those happen by state statute after every decennial census. So what I wanted to do was give you a little perspective on independent redistricting commissions in California. 8 counties have them. They cover about 60% of the state population. And these, in 7 of those instances, were created by state legislation. And you can see that they are largely larger counties: LA, San Diego, Orange, Riverside, Fresno, Kern, and Sacramento have IRCs that were created by state legislation. In Santa Barbara, theirs was created by a voter initiative in 2018. And we're going to hear from Ms. Megan Turley here in a little bit, who is a member of that redistricting commission. So let me give you a few slides here on the content of what's in 977. And I would emphasize that as it proceeds through the hearings in the Assembly, it will get, and in fact, last week, coming out of Assembly Elections Committee was slightly modified with some clarifying language. The key that our board went forward with in asking for this to be created was that it should be based on existing state legislation, because having consistency with other redistricting commissions seemed a good idea for us. We did want it customized for San Luis County. In particular, given the size of our county, while most of the commissions created a number 14 members on them, we thought that 11 was a good number. And the other issues that we had, were the questions that were listed in that third bullet: political balance. What are the qualifications of commissioners? Selection, how are they selected, and what are their responsibilities? The timeline for implementation of 977 is that it needs to be passed out of the Assembly and agreed to again by the Senate before the end of, I want to say, July, late July or August sometime. And assuming passage, it then goes to the desk of the governor. So let me walk you through a number of the specifics, and there are a number of slides here. A potential commissioner needs to be a resident of the county and registered to vote here. They cannot have changed their political party affiliation within the last 5 years, and they must be somehow active, at least have voted in at least one of the last 3 statewide elections. There are restrictions. This isn't just a completely open cattle call, if you will. And the restrictions actually are fairly significant and as again indicated in the slide here, over the last 8 years, the applicants or their spouse may not have served in an elected or appointed position. So either elected or, for instance, couldn't be appointed to the planning commission or a formal advisory committee to a city or the county. Can't have served as an officer, employee, or consultant to a campaign candidate or political party. Can't have served as a staff member, consultant, or contractor to any officer who currently serves in the county. And you can see as we get through these, there's an intent here. They may not have been a registered lobbyist in the county or contributed $500 or more in a year to any candidate for elected office in this county. And the same restrictions are going to apply to a parent, a sibling, a child, or an in-law for a period of 4 years rather than 8 years. So you can see the intent there is to find folks who are not political partisans. That's the motivation here, as I think all of you know who've been in the county for some time, that the circumstances of the redistricting in following the 2020 census, the actions taken by the Board of Supervisors in 2021, which created a map that was used in the 2022 election, was widely thought to have been highly motivated by political partisanship. And so what this bill tries to do, and again, this is consistent with the structure of other commissioners, other commissions in the state, is to find folks who are interested in their community, who care about our democratic processes and vote, but who are not so politically polarized as some folks who have been involved in previous iterations. So in looking at the folks that they'll be talking about, they're looking for certain experience. This is again, within the legislation, it's written out that they should demonstrate these skills, analytic skills, understanding what redistricting and voting rights and the federal and state and legal requirements look like. That they've demonstrated an ability to be impartial or objective might be another way of characterizing that. And to really appreciate that there's a diverse demographics and geography of the county. Really some sense that they understand the county. And I think, again, it remains to be seen, should this bill pass, exactly what the application form might look like. But again, we would be the elections official, who you'll see in a minute, is the operative individual here, is looking for some expression of abilities along these lines. So then we get to the selection process. We want to, again, very important to produce a commission that's independent from the influence of the Board of Supervisors and reasonably representative of the county's diversity. So, the shorthand of this process would be that an interested person who thinks they're qualified applies to the county elections official. That would be our county clerk recorder. And the election official reviews the application and selects up to 60 qualified applicants and divides them into pools for the five pools for the 5 supervisorial districts. Then at a regularly scheduled public meeting, which would typically be, I think, a meeting of the Board of Supervisors, or the clerk could, as an independent elected official, could perhaps notice one themselves. The clerk or a county designee, her designee, selects one commissioner from each of the subpools. That is, by random drawing of this qualified set of applicants, the commissioner draws one from each supervisorial district. And then at a separate public meeting, those 5 commissioners will select 6 more commissioners from the pool that remains. So a little bit of process here, but again, we want to be sure that we get representation from all 5 of the districts, and then also allow those folks to fill out the commission with folks from all over the county. So the commission is established. The responsibilities are covered in the next couple of slides. First of all, we're going to get a commission together. We want those commissioners to be active and engaged. The bullet here says attendance at meetings are required. The amendment that was actually accepted by Senator Laird last week added to the greatest extent practicable. There was a concern that too hard an absolute attendance measure would be a little bit difficult. So the Assembly Committee added, to the greatest extent practicable, the commissioners need to attend their meetings. They need to demonstrate the impartiality that will reinforce to the public the confidence that this truly is an independent body. No ex parte communications, meaning no conversations about the business of the commission outside of the open meetings. There was a little bit of detail added in the amendment. I think it's more a technical detail describing exactly what that communication might, what acceptable communication, for instance, with staff that staffs the commission might entail. Then the commission is going to hold public hearings. Legislation indicates they need to hold 5 before they draw a set of maps. and 3 after they have put those maps out for public consideration and commentary. There is a whole set of regulations regarding making sure that the information that the commission works with is transparent, meaning that it should be posted and made available to the public as they move forward. So again, back to the responsibilities, a couple of prohibitions for commission members. They won't get involved in political campaigns. The language specific, endorse, work for, volunteer, or make a contribution to any candidate for a county elected office while they're part of this commission. And they can't be a candidate for an elected office. And that stands within 5 years after their appointment to the commission. And again, I believe there was some slight clarifying language that was taken in the amendment that, if you do a search for SB 977 2024, you'll get the Legiscan or other legislative databases that can show you exactly what the status of the bill, what the current language of the bill is. So then the more responsibilities to again make sure that it doesn't appear that the commissioner had any interest in drawing a map in a way that might benefit themselves later after they leave the commission. So they won't accept employment as a staff consultant or a staff member or consultant. They won't receive a non-competitively bid contract or register as a lobbyist within the county or working for a county official. And then finally, here's the timeline that I referenced earlier. The bill was submitted in January. It passed in May. August 31st is the deadline for it to get out of the assembly, and the governor must sign or veto it by September 30th. If signed, it goes into effect on the 1st of January of 25, and then the commission itself gets created in 2030 as the census is conducted, and in 2031 is when they need to finish the maps, the new maps, by the end of the year in order to use that for the 2032 elections. So you can see just a couple of things. This is an effort to produce an independent commission, and we're talking over the long term. These things only come up every 10 years, but we want to be sure that these maps are done as fairly as humanly possible. And I guess you would I should stress the word humanly possible, because in the end, that this commission will be made up of the human residents of the county of San Luis Obispo. The legislation and the statutory requirements are set up to try to create as good a commission as is possible. And I think if we follow them in reasonably good faith, there are good checks and balances there to give us good confidence that we can find a group of 11 people in this county who are both informed and committed to local government and will do a good job in drawing the maps that we'll use for the next cycle of elections starting in 2032. With that, I think I will yield the floor and look forward to any questions that folks may have, and very much appreciate the chance to be with you today and talk about our independent redistricting.
Thank you, Bruce. That was very interesting and good details and background on the CRC. Our next presenter will be Mike Latner. He's a professor at Cal Poly in political science and also an expert in redistricting. And he's also the Senior Voting Rights Fellow for the Center for Science and Democracy, Union of Concerned Scientists. So Mike.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Bruce, for that great layout of the Structure of the commission. I will share my screen now. Let's see, and hopefully everyone's seeing that okay? Hopefully I can get a thumb up or something.
Yes.
Very good. All right. So before I address SLO County's proposal specifically, I want to just summarize the development of independent redistricting commissions and their function and what really matters. There are more than 8 states now have adopted statewide districting commissions, including some that are models. California, for example, has really become a model for the rest of the nation. Our commission has gone through 2 cycles now and produced effective representative maps for all 3 legislative assemblies for California for congressional assembly and Senate seats. And the incentive for independent commissions comes out of largely the failure of legislatures to produce effective representation for their citizens over the last 20 or 30 years. This development has been parallel with the increase in partisan gerrymandering and the whittling down of voting rights for those protected under the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And we saw in 2010, probably, well, by our estimates, the 3rd worst national gerrymandering in the history of the country for congressional districts. That coincided with 22 state legislatures drawing their own districts, which led to the worst gerrymandering at the state legislative level, probably in the entire history of the country. And so the reform movement and movement to establish independent redistricting commissions comes as a result of legislative inaction or malfeasance in many cases. Within California, the number of counties and cities and other districts that are developing or have designed their own independent commissions has grown tremendously, largely as a result of the efforts of civic organizations, not just the League of Women Voters, but Common Cause in particular has been a leader in this space. California Common Cause introduced legislation that allowed counties and sub-county districts to design their own commissions and to implement independent redistricting. And as Bruce noted, that's been successful in a number of counties. There are also 5 or 6 large cities, including Fresno and Sacramento, and other municipalities that are using commissions to design their municipal boundaries. And so the movement is afoot. Commissions are increasingly an effective answer to the challenges presented by redistricting. And these are not simply partisan challenges. These are challenges in part because there are goals that are not always reconcilable, that are frankly part of the districting process. And our research in particular, I've written 2 books on this subject now. The jury is in on independent commissions in terms of their effectiveness. So when you compare the level of bias that is a function of the districting process, independent commissions do far better than state legislatures in terms of producing less biased maps. They also do better than courts. Oftentimes, redistricting challenges lead to litigation and end up in the courts. The courts often have to make the decision, either selecting their own special master to draw maps or setting up a process through which maps can be drawn. And courts are kind of a crapshoot, right? I mean, we might think of the courts as being impartial purveyors, but they of course are not. Courts are by definition incrementalist. That is, they don't want to change a lot. They are hesitant to inject themselves into the political thicket. And so independent commissions have really become the model for redistricting for the nation as a whole, and for California specifically, where we are leading the way. So I'll talk a little bit about the selection process and the criteria. And the things that I want to focus on are the goals. What are we trying to achieve with independent commissions? And the first process, phase one, is the selection process. That is, how do we select members and who do we select? And the goals there are threefold. First and foremost, as I think Bruce made very clear, impartiality, right? So the single most important principle for setting up an independent commission is independence. That is being demonstrating and making sure that the public is confident in the separation of power between the legislators or those whose seats are being drawn and those drawing the seats. Second is expertise. You need to bring in expertise. You need people who know what they're doing. Not just because you actually need that level of expertise, because districting is a complex process. It involves the need to have analytic skills, geographic information skills, and knowledge of the community and communities of interest that are involved. But also because that expertise then lends itself to the third goal, which is legitimacy. And both impartiality and expertise get us to what I think is the ultimate goal of an independent commission, which is that it's perceived as a legitimate process, and it is a process that gains the confidence of constituents. That is the ultimate goal. With regard to the process of selection, which is fraught because there is, in my view, an inevitable acknowledgement of partisanship. I mean, we can try to cleanse members of their partisan sins as much as possible, but the fact of the matter is that everyone has partisan interests, and so what we need to find is a balance between ensuring impartiality, which is not the same as nonpartisanship, and in making sure that we're getting the expertise and the leaders in the community to acknowledge the process as legitimate so that we get public buy-in. And in that sense, I would like to see a little more focus on who the committee wants, that is, who should be on the committee, as opposed to who we don't want, which are obviously partisan hacks. And in the interest of that, the more that respected community leaders are part of the process, the extent to which communities of interest are represented on the commission, and frankly need to be recruited, because often we're talking about members of underrepresented groups. And I know that this is going to make some folks balk, but actually having formal partisan representation, not of electeds, but of partisan leaders. So whether they're a member of the county party chairs or something like that, at least having some of those members on the committee, and obviously the focus on nonpartisan restrictions here might be a little excessive, but I think that they deserve to be rethought, because you really do need to add legitimacy to the content and the membership. And if people see that there are recognized leaders on the commission, that actually adds legitimacy to the process as well. Second, I would say that the randomization component is excellent. And the more that we can make the selection process like jury duty, as boring as that sounds, the better, because that's actually how you get impartiality. Rather than trying to surgically remove any signs of partisanship from the process, the more that and over time, the more that the committee selection process and the work of a commission becomes just part of the regular administrative state of the county, the less partisan it will be. And frankly, this is the way that the rest of the world usually does it. Partisan or the districting process is much less partisan in most other democracies. One, because very few, I don't know of any other democracies that actually allow electeds to draw their own districts, but the process itself is very much more like jury duty. It's much more of an administrative process, and the parties are just not involved because the stakes of the game are not as high. One of my biggest concerns on the selection process is getting from a sort of random assignment or having pools of qualified of applicants, how do you make that a representative committee? And that's difficult because we're dealing with just 11 members, and so the numbers are pretty small, and so we've got to put some thought into this. Right now, the selection of 5 members, of 1 member from each district, I think the selection process is fine, but to the extent that there's only 1 member, that might be perceived as a member, you know, even with the ex parte, with the communication restrictions and all that, which I think are great ideas. It might look as though that's the supervisor's member and that they're going to act as an agent in their favor. So one option might be to have 2 members from each district from both of the major parties, right? So again, the object there is not so much trying to create a nonpartisan process, is to create a representative process and a process where constituents actually see their members as part of the commission. And so if you have 11 members total, you divide that by 5 districts, you get 2.2 members per district, right? You could select 1 member, 1 registered member of each party, and then have at-large alternates and the remainder either chosen randomly or, you know, by the clerk. I think that the clerk choosing is a very important part of this process. And so I would actually prefer to see the randomization component even expanded, or selecting from specific party pools. Again, if you're focusing on, if you want to get a representative commission, because the county is just slightly leaning Democratic, right? You could have 2 members of each major party, and they could be selected randomly from a pool of applicants that are Republicans and Democrat. And you might even suggest, if there are, and this is something, again, it's more like jury duty, you could allow for the removal of certain members, just as plaintiffs and defendants are able to do in jury selection, and repeat the selection process until you've got a commission and alternatives that everyone can live with. Making that a more public process, and again, making it not too exclusive, because we aren't Los Angeles County and we're not going to have a huge pool of citizens to choose from. I think that would add legitimacy to the process. And you know, random selection can obviously be a little, it by definition inserts more uncertainty into the process. That's part of what we want to ensure impartiality. But that also means that the pool needs to be thinned out up front. And so, you know, having those expertise requirements, even more specific expertise requirements about what types of skills and backgrounds people are looking for, that will go a long way towards making the process more legitimate in the end. Now getting to district criteria. And here I want to just say that when we think about impartiality and how can we be assured that we're going to get a fair outcome, there are you know, input ways and output ways to achieve that. So we can either, again, try to screen for partisanship as much as possible at the beginning, so that the people that are making the decisions are there's a higher probability that they'll be impartial and work together. Alternatively, we can focus on redistricting criteria, and this would be my suggestion, is that we use the criteria, that is, what are the rules that the commission has to follow to ensure that we're getting a fair outcome. And I don't think there's enough attention being paid to this in the bill as currently designed, and so I have some suggestions. Again, multiple goals, right? So we want, first and foremost, we want political equality. We want everyone's vote to count the same. We want elections. We want the system to be responsive to changes in voter support. So if the majority of supervisors is doing a really bad job, we want to be able to have a system that is responsive to voters if they disapprove of one or more candidates. And we want a proportional system. That is, we want a system where we are where we're at least ensuring that no minority is going to get wiped out or not represented, and we're just going to have majority rule, or worse yet, we set up a system where we have an entrenched minority and we effectively have minority rule. And unfortunately, those are all features that are possible with the single seat systems that we're using. And so with the focus on political equality, that can go either way, right? I mean, we can have these goals don't always work together. And what I mean by that, and I'll just give you a few examples, is we could have a really hyper responsive system, right? So we could design a districting plan where every district is basically a microcosm of the whole county. That is, it leans slightly Democratic, right? And if we have an election, every district will basically go the way of the sort of median voter in the county, which would be hyper responsive, right? So if conservatives were more popular for one election season, right, then it would shift all the seats to one group of candidates versus another. The problem with that, of course, is that that's a very disproportional system, right? So that would wipe out representation under the sort of winner take all rules that we use, and would leave a lot of voters underrepresented. Alternatively, we could create what we might think of as a hypo-responsive system, right? And a hypo-responsive system would be proportional. That is, the majority of eligible voters in every district would probably be happy with their representative, but it would be more or less an incumbent protection plan, right? So again, a close county like San Luis Obispo, you'd basically have 4 very safe seats and then kind of 1 toss-up seat, right? And that would ensure that you get representation. It would ensure some level of proportionality, but it wouldn't be very responsive to changes in voter sentiment, right? And so we've got to think about how these principles trade off against one another. A balanced plan, something that would probably be optimal for a very small assembly like the Board of Supervisors, is, you'd have something like 2 safe seats and then 2 seats that are leaners, right? So if there's a big change in public opinion or voting behavior, that could be reflected in the composition of the Board of Supervisors, and then again, 1 toss-up district that would be the most sensitive or the most responsive district. Again, thinking about voters as a whole, right? Because it's voters as a whole that the County Board of Supervisors represents and that should be represented. So now I'll just basically summarize the criteria. What are the existing criteria? Well, there's some criteria for plans that we call hard criteria, right? And these are criteria that are set by the federal government, beginning with population equality as a result of the reapportionment and the voting rights litigation that happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Districts have to be roughly equal population in order to protect voters from what's called vote dilution. So if you have a smaller number of voters in a district than an adjacent district, the more populated district, those votes are diluted. They don't count as much as other voters in terms of the percentage of seats that they can elect. And so we start with population equality. Then there are a whole set of other geographic, largely, criteria that refer to contiguity. That is, that a district has to be like one piece. Compactness, that districts have to be reasonably shaped, or they don't look like weird shapes. And this is sort of the when people think about gerrymandering, they often think about uncompact districts that are really weird looking, although that's actually a kind of a false equivalence, because you can have very compact districts that are also very discriminatory. And then communities of interest. That is the representation for communities of interest, and these guidelines are in the statewide legislation. Those are important. These are the things that should come first. The way that the law is currently set up is that there's required compliance. So, for example, all districting plans have to comply with the Voting Rights Act as currently interpreted. But an actual analysis of racially polarized voting and whether or not there are any VRA protected voters whose votes are being diluted by a particular plan is not a requirement. Neither is a test for actual partisan bias or vote dilution through partisan gerrymandering. The recommendations I'm making here actually come off of analyses of the California, Michigan, and other commissions that argue that we should just have these tests done up front, that we should require racially polarized voting analysis so that we can ensure that whatever plan has been proposed, that it is in compliance with the VRA. Similarly, we should require partisan bias analysis. These are not very, data heavy plans these aren't hard tests. The data is already there. And making sure that those tests are done can also, again, add to the legitimacy of the process, right? Because we know what we're getting up front. We're not trying to ignore partisan data or ignore racial data. And frankly, when you do that, it also leaves you open to litigation in the future. And so a more thorough, comprehensive process that shows that those sorts of tests show that the plans are not biased, again, lead to more public buy-in, and people can be confident that the outcomes are going to be fair. Third, I would require a proportionality test. And this comes from my own personal experience as an expert in some of the state of Ohio's districting litigation. The state of Ohio passed an initiative, and as part of their redistricting commission, which has plenty of its own problems, but one of the things that actually worked was specifying in language that the proportion of districts whose voters, based on elections over the past 10 years, the proportion of districts that favor each political party must correspond to the average countywide preferences of voters, right? That requirement saved the commission maps, and the Supreme Court used that language to ensure that there were fair outcomes. And so I think my time is about up. Those are my suggestions, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Mike. The very interesting insights and feedback on Senate Bill 977. Okay, and then our third presenter is Megan Turley, who served as a redistricting on the Santa Barbara County Independent Redistricting Commission last time, I should say, and is going to share her observations and experiences, lessons learned, if you will, serving as a commissioner. Megan?
Yeah, Leslie, thanks so much for having me. And Michael, that was so interesting. It's been a while since I've dove back into the sort of data side of redistricting, and it's really lovely to hear more about that and hear some ideas that can be taken for both Santa Barbara's and for SLO's independent redistricting commissions for the next cycle. So Leslie, you sent me a couple of questions, so I'll just start with the first one, which was sort of why I applied for the commission and what motivated me to be a part of it. And I'm hoping this can be a bit of a conversation, Leslie, as otherwise I'm just going to be sort of talking for 7 to 10 minutes. But I applied to be on the commission because a friend actually reached out to me and suggested that I apply. And as Michael mentioned in his presentation, one of the real barriers to involvement was that there really weren't a lot of communities of interest and in fact, specifically young people, people of color, which I'm not, but and just generally interest in the redistricting process. And so the pool was very, very small at the time for Santa Barbara, and it wasn't really representative at all of the demographics and the diversity of the county. So they wanted to see more people get involved. They wanted people to be more aware of the process, and they asked me to submit an application. It was really simple. It was just a couple of brief questions, and I identified my race and ethnicity, my age, and my voter registration information. And I didn't really think much else of it, to be honest. I wasn't expecting to be selected. I just had put it in because I felt like it was my civic duty, and here I am now. And then Leslie, your next question was, how was my experience with the selection process, and what procedures did Santa Barbara use to determine if an applicant was qualified, and how did those processes work? So our inspector of elections, as Mr. Lenner had kind of pointed out earlier, was given sort of the dubious task of deciding who out of the initial pool of applicants were the 45 most qualified. And it was pretty unclear how that decision was made. And it was a point of contention throughout the process. But of those initial 45 that were selected, one member from each district was appointed to the commission by a random drawing. And then that initial 5-person commission then selected 2 finalists from each district to interview. in front of the commission at a public meeting, and I was one of the candidates selected for District 2. And it really wasn't a surprise to me at all, because it was clear based on the demographics of the existing appointees and the guidelines in the redistricting ordinance that they're going to have to thread a couple of different needles to get sort of a representative commission. All of the randomly appointed first 5 commissioners were over 50 years old, white, and only one of them was a woman. And our ordinance specified that our committee had to be representative of the demographics of the county. There was also an overrepresentation of people who selected no party preference in the initial 5 commissioners, and an underrepresentation of Democrats. And our ordinance specifically said that we needed an equal percentage based on registered voters. Not equal to the registered voters, not equal for no party preference, Democrat and Republican. So looking at the candidates in my district, which was District 2, and all of the districts really, I was one of the only ones under 30. And so again, was not a surprise when they picked me for an interview. And the interview process was pretty straightforward. They asked us 5 questions about our experience, our ability to be nonpartisan and fair, and really to be able to play well with others, which is kind of the biggest, I would say, qualification for someone to be thinking about when they join a commission like this. And yeah, so that was pretty straightforward, and it went well for me. I would say, with no disrespect to the original 5 commissioners, that having them randomly appointed was a weakness for our specific commission, only because the pool was not diverse. So it was very hard for them to fully follow the guidelines and the ordinance around having a commission that reflected the demographic makeup of our county in regards to balancing things like age, gender, ethnicity, and party preference. So Mr. Latner talked a little bit about this as well. I'm not sure how you get to a process that's fair with this. I think definitely it is having a significant amount of outreach to communities of interest to be part of that initial application pool. There might be some additional answers to how you make sure that the pool is diverse, including being more clear about the selection of the qualification of the candidates. And then talking a little bit more about the high and low points of my experience and what went well and what didn't. Things that worked, I think the most successful thing, and my biggest piece of advice for future commissioners, is to really be successful at this, you have to get out of the way and enable the public to draw and submit and discuss their own maps with you sort of as facilitators. And this was really key in maintaining the trust in the process for the public. They really didn't want to see us drawing the maps or deciding where the lines were. They wanted to see us listening to the public, and that was the most important part. We really saw our charge as implementing the public will as opposed to drawing maps. To have all the maps come from the public, and I think we had over 200 maps submitted, created a lot more ownership over the process and less overall controversy directed at us as commissioners. To do this, we had a lot of public outreach meetings, but we also did individual meetings as commissioners with communities of interest who were not able to make it to public meetings. I'm not sure how that is enabled or not enabled within this bill, so that's something to keep in mind. We were under the Brown Act, and so we did have to report our ex parte communications, but we did have them, and it was a really, really major part of the process, because if I was at, for example, a farmer's market or at the gas station or at a winery, and I ran into somebody and I wanted to talk about redistricting, I wanted to be able to do that and also report it out in an ethical way. And that was really a way to receive feedback about what wasn't working for constituents or what was working for them, and then being able to really apply that knowledge to the selection of the final maps. What worked particularly well for me, because I have a background in sociology and sociological research, is being able to dive deep into that data that was provided by the last census, as well as our demographers, and take a look at where the districts were 10 years ago and where they were now, what has changed, who moved in, who moved out. But it was also really important to keep in mind the feedback that we'd already received or were receiving from the outreach process to contextualize that data. Neither one on its own gave us enough information to make the right decisions. And I can go into a bit more of that at the end if we have time in terms of some examples of that. But finally, on the what worked side, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that one of the high points for me was having a chair with a really strong background in running meetings. Glenn Morris, who was representing District 5, we often disagreed on matters of politics, but he was a fantastic facilitator for our commission and just so incredibly humble and respectful as our leader. And it really did renew my sense of faith in being able to come together with folks who disagree most of the time to do something really important. And that really brings it back to when you're selecting commissioners, one of the most important parts is just having people who are willing to work with folks that they maybe disagree with on something that's important. On the side of what didn't work quite so well, one of the low points for me, and as someone who's really guided by an internal sense of justice, was seeing the process co-opted by partisan interest relatively early on, not necessarily in the selection of the commissioners from the commission side of things, but from the general public. We had to defend against some pretty active harassment of individual commissioners outside of meetings, including threatening text messages and people knocking on their doors. And also a legal challenge that didn't have anything to do with the substance of our work, but really served as an unnecessary distraction for the process. That legal issue tied up a significant portion of our budget, which could have gone to education and outreach and marketing, but instead went towards our legal costs, which was really frustrating. Some of the other areas of improvement for future commissions, in my opinion, would be to try to appoint commissioners a bit earlier in the process so that we could pick our own demographers and our own marketing contractors and consultants. We did find that the contractors that were selected for us often didn't have expertise in our local area. They didn't know Santa Barbara or Santa Barbara County, and they had some priorities that were a little bit misaligned with the priorities of the commissioners. And particularly, we had to be very, very firm with our demographers about not wanting to draw the maps as a commission, but only editing maps that had already been submitted from the general public. And then finally, we licensed a redistricting software that was billed as pretty user-friendly, but it ended up being incredibly unwieldy. So that was another place where if I had a choice to go back and do that, I probably would look for a different option for redistricting software, because that felt like a missed opportunity for introducing a web-based tool that would be really accessible for map drawing, but ended up not being very helpful for us. And then Leslie, hi.
I just wanted to let you know that we need to wrap up pretty quickly.
Yes.
Because we're running late.
I'm almost done. I have 2 more minutes and then I'll wrap up. Okay, so finally, the league asked me what I would do. Would I do it again? And what would I say to encourage someone to apply to be a commissioner? And I do think this is the most important part. So thanks for giving me some grace on time here. I absolutely would do it again. And as long as I was able to join the meetings on Zoom during work hours, I would be wholeheartedly a yes on that. And the reason for that is that I am 33 years old now. I was 30 at the time. I work full time. There was literally no way I was going to be able to do this work, which often required 4 to 8 hours of meetings per week, if I couldn't join on Zoom. So that made it so accessible for me. And I think that's a huge part of getting communities of interest to the table, is making it as accessible as possible. We also provided Spanish language interpretation, which was huge. The only reason that happened was because the timing of this overlapped with a global pandemic. So there is a silver lining there. And I did want to say again that the experience really did renew a sense of confidence for me in our local democratic processes. And that's really only continued as I've seen and heard more about the impacts of redistricting over the last few years. I would encourage anyone who is feeling disillusioned with our current political situation to find ways that are nonpartisan to get involved in local government. You really would be amazed at how much government relies on free, voluntary labor of community members to make these huge and impactful decisions. So I'd love to see less people sitting on the sidelines in the peanut gallery and way more people offering their time and finding solutions like this. And again, I don't want to paint a rosy picture and say that everything went so smoothly and that there weren't dysfunctional elements to the process, but it was the first time that we did this. And I really do believe that most of the folks who were involved in this were well-intentioned, well-informed, and made decisions that were guided by a real desire to make a positive impact. And I do think that the final map reflects that. So thank you so much for having me. And I'm happy to answer any questions if there are specific ones directed my way.
Thank you so much, Megan. That was very insightful. I appreciate that. We are running a little long here, so we have several questions. I'm going to try and split them up by the different presenters, and we'll get to as many as we can. The webinar is scheduled to end in about 4 minutes. If you have to go, that's fine. We will be recording this, and you can always come back and watch the end of it if you have to leave. Bruce, I think I'll start with you. A question about the qualifications for commissioners.
Mhm.
Is a person excluded from serving as a commissioner if they have been appointed to a city advisory committee?
I don't think so. I was looking at the bill language, but I think that that question is better answered in looking at the election code that the bill references. So somewhere in election code section 23003 would be that answer, I'm guessing. I didn't have a free screen to figure that out, but my guess is no, but controlling would be that piece of election code.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to direct this one to Mike Latner. How does the commission selection process protect from special interests grooming people for 4 years and flooding applications with qualified people that favor their interests?
The grooming question. Yeah, well, I mean, my sense is that the current criteria are going to be pretty effective in reducing that. I mean, I think the larger point that that partisans are going to kind of try to game the commission, right? I mean, we should be upfront about that, and because this is a very politically consequential decision that's being made. And so again, my emphasis would not be so much on trying to cleanse the commission of partisanship, but to put clear guardrails on what kinds of outcomes the commission has to produce. And on that note, I would also just double down on Megan's point that arguably the most important part of the process is the public input, and making sure that public input is transparent and that it's actually staged so that the commission has an opportunity to respond to the public and to show the changes that have been made and what decisions, what data went into their decision making with proposed maps. Far more important in terms of having a legitimate process and a process that's perceived as legitimate than who's actually sitting on the commission.
Could I follow that just quickly, Leslie? The question of gaming the system is always going to be there. I saw that question in the Q&A and thought, that would be an awful lot of work to try to get somebody set up to be part of a commission that's got a random process that's going to occur 5 years from now, because you got to be in the same party registration for 5 years. A true partisan wouldn't stand for registering in the wrong party for 5 years. It would drive them crazy. So I think that the key here is to understand we're not going to get a perfect commission, but I think that what the provisions that are in there get us to a good commission. Certainly better than the result we saw from the Board of Supervisors in 2021.
This next question is I'll direct to Megan. To serve as a commissioner, do you need to have a good background in statistics?
You do not need to have a good background in statistics. A few of us did, and I would say it's probably good to have a couple commissioners who have a background in statistics, but we hired really skilled demographers who have PhDs in statistics, and they're very good at their jobs. I would say it's a nice to have, it's not a need to have, and you definitely will be able to understand the work even if you don't.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Bruce. In terms of selection criteria in the legislation as it stands now, are there requirements for the number of each political party on the commission?
The way the legislation written is that the proportional representation should roughly approximate the political registration of the county as a whole. So again, if you're down to 11 commissioners, you're not going to get the fractions right necessarily to the third decimal point. But I would also comment in listening to Michael talk about the question of partisanship versus randomness and trying to craft partisan versus craft random. Those things are in conflict. And my own sense is that, again, working within the fact that there will be controversy within the commission. There will be the possibility of a process that is difficult. I think the random aspects of this really are within the overall scope of qualifications that show an inclination toward impartiality. The randomness, I think, is the better way to go than trying to craft the partisanship just right.
Okay, thank you. My volume is low and I haven't figured out how to increase it, so I'll shout. Mike, it sounds like you're recommending something closer to bipartisan rather than nonpartisan. Is that correct?
No, I mean, so bipartisan sort of de facto, perhaps. I would actually prefer a multi-partisan approach, if there was such. But the fact of the matter is that we have two dominant political parties in the county. Third-party registration is very low, and I don't think any kind, I mean, without a much larger commission, right, of 20, 25 members, would you be able to get third-party representation, from a proportional perspective? And no party preference is not a third party. And I think we need to be really clear about that there's no such thing as independence. And we should not be considering people that choose not to register with either of the major parties as independents. Political science research on this is pretty clear. People who consider themselves independents or vote or who are registered no party preference act pretty much just like partisans. Their voting patterns are the same. They just don't, want to be associated with one of the major parties for whatever reason. So I would prefer an open proportional system. I mean, that's what we need to have. But realistically, the default there is that we ensure that we have representation of the two major parties and that neither party can dominate the process.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly jump in there and say that I think what Michael said is accurate. You're not going to find many people within any county who are not going to be partisan in some way, and that's fine. That's not the issue. The issue is that you don't want an overrepresentation on a commission that will really sway where the lines are going to go in a very partisan way. So as you said, random is better than selected, but selected for a purpose. One thing to keep in mind is that in order to really have a strong and robust random pool, you have to do a lot of outreach to communities of interest. Because if your pool is literally just one political party who got the mailer that said, please fill out this form, then that random doesn't really apply there. So it really does have to be a true sort of random sample. In order to do that, you have to have a lot of really targeted and intentional outreach to communities who often are not involved in the process.
Okay, that makes sense. Megan, how much time did you have to devote to the commission activities?
So I would say it was about on average 4 to 8 hours a week for the first 9 months of commission. And then it ramped up pretty heavily in the last 2 months. I think we had a 9-hour meeting, which was one of our last meetings. And almost all of that, I would say like 90% of that was public comment. Which is good. It means that people were really involved in the process and they felt strongly about it. But basically the last 2 months of when you're really selecting the final maps and hearing from the public about it, you should expect that this is going to be a part-time job. So maybe 10 to 20 hours a month on average, if not more than that.
Okay, not an insignificant commitment. Bruce, a question about the triggering for redistricting in the law. If the county population in 2030 doesn't shift enough to trigger the mandatory redistricting, does the bill still require the formation of an IRC and going through the process? Yes,
because in effect, maybe make a very subtle distinction here. Essentially, the way I read the construct here is that in 2032, the previous districts will have expired, and there needs to be a commission to reestablish districts. Those districts might look very close, if not exactly the same as the ones that, were in place for the last 10 years. But we've got to go through the process of verifying the population equality and the adherence to the Fair Maps Act, which has this ranked system of preserving communities of interest and then cities and then other things, as well as making sure that voting rights are properly taken care of.
I would just quickly add to that there's I think the current board majority was very good in seeing that there wasn't major population change from the last census and decided to adopt a very similar map. Unless there's a reason to redistrict, you shouldn't necessarily redistrict, because moving people in and out of districts is not great for voting behavior.
In fact, that is the lasting negative impact of the gerrymander of 2021, is the confusion over who represents who's my supervisor is a question we still get to this day.
Right, and Bruce, there was a question from a resident in Los Osos who indicated they weren't able to vote for a supervisor in the last election due to redistricting, and will they have to wait 8 years before they can vote for one?
Well, they'll have to wait 2.5 more years, or two more years, in that their next chance to vote for the second district supervisor will be 2026. That's a consequence of both the redistricting that was done in 2021 and the resolution of the lawsuit that was filed on it. And since the resolution was to go back to districts that look very similar, then that's the consequence that is the gap. That's one of the negative consequences. In the converse, the community of Atascadero, for them, has had to vote for a supervisor 3 times in 4 years. So be subjected to all that campaigning. I mean, that I don't wish that on anyone.
No, I don't either. Mike, the commission this is related to the commission bylaws. Once appointed, the commissioners will have to establish protocols and bylaws to govern their operations. What should be included in those protocols?
Oh gosh, there are some great analyses of the operation of commissions, including the statewide California Redistricting Commission. Christian Gross at USC has produced a very nice analysis. I'd be happy to share these with anyone with the league, and the league can share these documents. There are some very good guidelines and best practices that we've learned, frankly. So there's really no reason to reinvent the wheel. And again, my sense is that the single most important thing, which Megan pointed out, is being responsive to the public, right? Having a structured process where the public provides their input, the commission has to consider it, and then discuss and report on what those considerations were and why changes were made, and ultimately what are the underlying considerations that were taken into account with the final proposed map. That's really important.
Okay, thank you. Megan, what was the legal issue that plagued the Santa Barbara Commission?
So I added the link to that in the Q&A because it had nothing to do with the commission. It actually had to do with our selection of lawyers, because there was a very, very narrow requirement in the ordinance that said your lawyers have to be at the same qualification level as a commissioner. So they can't have made a campaign contribution over $500 to any campaigns. They couldn't have been involved. And basically the only people within our district who were qualified under that we only had 2 options. We chose the one who we thought was the most qualified. And they dug up some really small, what they thought was violation of that, and sued our commission over our choice of law, like representation. And it was rejected. The lawsuit was rejected, but it did take up hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of pretrial funding that could have been used out of our budget for other things, that was used in the county council defending our lawyers and our lawyers defending themselves. So it was, I would say, I would go so far as to say it was a bit silly. But yeah, it was, there's more information in that the independent article that I posted in the chat.
Okay, thanks for doing that.
Yeah.
Bruce, this is a question for you related to the clerk's role in selection. With the provision for the clerk to determine the qualifications of applicants, how do you resolve disputes about the exercise of that authority?
That's a very good question. And it relates to another one. If you don't mind me jumping, there was a question at the bottom of the Q&A about should there be a minimum number of applicants in the pool, and those are both topics that are under some discussion between us and Senator Laird's office. I'm not sure exactly where that goes. Again, the actions of all players here are judged against the requirements. Should this pass, the intent of this legislation is to produce a particular kind of commission. Should a clerk, not do what we expect clerks to do, this is one of the parts of local government in particular that I still have great faith in, is the goodwill and competence of the clerk recorder of every county that I know. And they elections officials are, in my experience, uniformly persons of integrity. And so I think that there's a measured effort by those. But if some guidance, some guidelines, if not strict requirements, are put in there as part of the evolution of this bill, that might not be a bad thing. And I think it's an interesting question, again, in a county our size, to have a minimum number might be something worth considering, but that's not in the bill right now.
Okay. As a follow-up in terms of the commission makeup, will there be alternates to the 11 commissioners?
No, there aren't. But in the rules of procedure, it's detailed there that those rules shall include procedures for filling a vacancy, as well as if there's a need to remove a commissioner for cause. So that's been contemplated.
Okay. Mike, you may have already addressed this, but I'll go ahead and ask it. Is nonpartisan unrealistic and essentially off the table?
Well, yeah, I mean, as I tell my students, I mean, technically, right, Bruce is an elected nonpartisan, the board is nonpartisan, everything that's below the, I guess, the Board of Equalization and everything else is technically nonpartisan, but there's no such thing as nonpartisan elections, right? I mean, parties are involved in every aspect of registering voters and canvassing for nonpartisan and partisan elections, and it's parties are at the center of democracy, and we need to get over there's so much anti-party sentiment in this country because there's so much dissatisfaction with the two major parties, which is totally understandable, right? But every partisan politics is what organizes politics. I mean, it's the basis of it. And so my emphasis again would be on providing clear guidelines and guardrails so that regardless who is sitting on the commission, we can be assured that we have a fair outcome and that we are assured that the commission is following rules that are set up to ensure a fair outcome. Okay,
thank you. That brings us to about 1:15, and we should probably wrap this up. We've got most of the questions answered. I want to thank you all for participating and sharing your knowledge with us today. It was very helpful, and thank you to all the attendees that are still on. I also want to thank my committee for pulling this together, as well as the communications team for producing it. And we hope that it really deepened your understanding of the proposed CRC for our county. We look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you.